All right. Well, it is 10 o'clock on the dot, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for coming today. Welcome to the Bentley Rare Book Museum's virtual Coffee with a Curator program. If it's your first time, we are so happy that you decided to join us on this Wednesday morning. If you've been attending, thank you for coming. We've had so many interesting programs already this semester. So thank you so much for continuing to stick with it and just be such a great participant. I'm so appreciative. Um, just one little bit of housekeeping I wanted to give the group. So next week we will not meet online because we are going to do an open house program like we used to do here in the library right outside the Bentley Rare Book Museum. So if you can make it, that would be wonderful. If not, no problem. I just wanted to give folks a chance to actually see and touch some of the materials that we've been working with, and also give our students a chance to as well. So next week, again, we won't meet online, and I'll send an email. But the following week, we will be back to our regular online schedule. So just to kind of break it up a little bit there. But that's my only bit of housekeeping. Got a couple more folks coming in, so let me get that. Okay. So again, for those of you who are familiar with our program, you know that we always begin with our Where's Andrew segment. Andrew, can you wave your hand for people that are new? Okay, there's Andrew. All right, so we see his square, but Andrew always changes his background to a bookish place. And we as a group have to try to guess where he is. And Andrew is very generous and usually makes or always makes the location somewhere that's connected to our theme. So again, today we are so excited to be celebrating the first day of National Hispanic Heritage Month. So I assume it has something to do with that. Is that right, Andrew? Okay, wonderful. So folks, we can have at it. Usually, again, maybe we can start with trying to guess a location, or because we need to pare it down. It's beautiful wherever you are.
Yeah, surprisingly, this is much nicer than Jeff Bezos' house last week.
Yes.
It's one I don't know if anyone will be able to guess or not. Someone may have actually been here. I don't know. This will either be really easy or very hard. I couldn't quite tell.
Okay. Are you?
Is this in Europe?
Actually, no, this is not.
It's in the US?
No, not of the United States either.
Mexico City.
Not Mexico City, but you're close, very close.
Mexico. Mexico?
It is in Mexico, yes.
Okay.
Is it a university?
It's actually not, surprisingly.
Okay.
Is it like a national library in Mexico, that something like that? No.
Nope.
So you're in Mexico, just not in you're in a different city in Mexico then.
Correct, but it's actually one rather close to Mexico City. So everyone get out your Mexican geography from school. And
I know, I'm like,
I am furiously Googling over here, let me tell you.
Google Maps was very helpful for this one. I will add that.
I think I have found it. Is it in Puebla, Mexico?
It is, yes.
Oh.
Okay, so I cannot pronounce this at all.
Nor can I.
Biblioteca Palafaciana, or I'm butchering this. I'm so sorry.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Oh.
It is the oldest public library in the Americas. It's founded in the 1600s.
Wow, that is so exciting. I did not know that. That's a great one, Andrew. And since we all, some of us who may not speak Spanish, it can be difficult to pronounce it. So as y'all know, Andrew always gives us a handout, and that is now in the chat. Feel free to download it, so at least you can kind of see it written. Oh, that is a great one. Wow, it's gorgeous. Every time we have these, all the time, I'm always thinking of like, I need to take a vacation here and a vacation there. That's what you do, Andrew. You make me want to take a lot of vacations.
And just to chime in a bit, I believe it's the Palafoxiana, the Biblioteca Palafoxiana de Puebla.
Thank
That
you
would be,
so much, because we definitely, at
Yeah.
least I know, I could not have
Yeah.
said that. Have you been there, Robert?
No, I've not been there. I've wanted to go. I've been to the Biblioteca Nacional de Monterrey in the north, and several others, but I haven't been to Puebla, much less to the Biblioteca. But
Wow.
that's a place I definitely like to visit at some point. It's gorgeous. I mean, it definitely rivals many of the libraries in Spain and Portugal. So
Oh, wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Thank you.
I might change this whole program. Maybe we'll just have you say that over and over again for the rest, because that was so beautiful. To hear it. So anyway, that's just wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it very much. So we'll go ahead then and get on. I'd like to say a brief note just about National Hispanic Heritage Month, which starts today in the U.S. So I think the National Archives gives a really wonderful overview of it. So I'm just going to read their little blurb about it. We celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, September 15th to October 15th, to recognize the achievements and contributions of Hispanic American champions who have inspired others to achieve success. The observation began in 1968 as Hispanic Heritage Week under President Lyndon Johnson, and was expanded by President Ronald Reagan in 1988 to cover a 30-day period. It was enacted into law on August 17th, 1988. So just a little note about that. You might be seeing, whether it's on Google or in different institutions and public libraries, celebration of Hispanic heritage and of Latin American heritage. So take note of that. And I think try to engage in the celebrations as much as you can. This is incredibly important and exciting. So anyway, without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Robert Simon, and it's Simon, Robert, right? That's how you say it? Okay, I want to make sure I wanted to say it the right way. So Dr. Simon teaches here at KSU. He lives in North Georgia, and he is a professor of Spanish and Portuguese at Kennesaw State University, and also the coordinator of the Portuguese program. Is that right? And he's published numerous books, articles, and other relevant texts on mysticism and otherness in the poetries of Angola, Portugal, and Spain. His poetry expresses a wish to find a deeper, loving connection with the people around him through the themes of love, loss, redemption, and the triumph of the sublime. And he also studies oboe. And I think that is absolutely amazing. So very, very accomplished, well-known here at KSU and beyond. So we are completely honored to be able to have Robert here with us to speak. So I'm going to share, Robert has a book of poems out that's recently, Robert, was it published last year or in 2019?
It was actually, well, it was supposed to be published late last year, but because of the pandemic, it ended up coming out in May of this year.
Oh, May this year, perfect.
Yes.
And that's an ode to friendship, right?
Yes, an ode to friendship, yes.
Perfect. So I'm going to add a link to that in the chat if any of y'all are interested in purchasing it and supporting Robert. I know I am. So I'm going to add that. But without further ado, Robert, if you would like to have the floor and give us a little bit of, let us know something about aspects of Spanish or Portuguese literature that are of interest to you.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Joelle, and I appreciate y'all being here. And thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to be here, truly. So what I was hoping to talk with y'all about was exactly that. First, just to go over kind of some some tendencies in late 20th and early 21st century poetry in Spain. So I was really gonna focus in Spain, because when we say Hispanic, we're generally talking about Spanish speaking. We could talk also about how this connects with particularly Mexican literature. Beyond Spain, Portugal, Angola, I've also studied somewhat late 20th century Mexican poetry. However, I was going to focus more on Spain for today. And by the way, if anybody has any questions as I'm going along, please let me know. I do have readings in English and in Spanish. One of the readings in Spanish, the first one I'll be reading, I've translated to English. The second one, I'm just going to give you a summary of it because I didn't have time to translate. I apologize. And then I'll read 3 poems from my new book. But I was hoping to read just examples of what's going on. So in Latin America, and we say Latin America, I'm thinking personally of Mexico and the North American end of what we call Latin America. So Mexico, the Caribbean, and what we call Central America. Although again, geographically speaking, there are a lot of problems with some of these designations. That we're looking at a sort of a deconstruction or criticism of a kind of superficial society in which we live. So we live in a society based on technology, a society very much based on short-term goals and on short-term pleasures or short-term desires. And that's fine and good in certain areas. However, for writers, for poets, there's a sort of lack of depth in that style of living. So particularly in Mexico, when you're looking also at the rise of the drug lords in the last 20 years, as I'm sure many of you are aware, when we in the United States Army and the CIA, working with the Colombian Army, managed to uproot many of the drug lords from Colombia and neighboring countries, they simply moved to northern Mexico, which is closer to their major market, and that's the U.S., particularly the southwestern end of the U.S. So because of that, now northern Mexico is overrun with drug lords. So in many cases, they're talking about how people try to live in the day-to-day in this context, okay, in Mexico. However, because my area of study is more Spain, I'll talk a little bit more about that. And again, if you have any questions or would like me to clarify anything or even slow down, I get excited about this, which means I start to speed up. Please, let me know or put in the chat that you have a question, and I'll be happy to stop. So we have what's called La Generación Nocilla. Nocilla is the Spanish word for Nutella. Has anybody here had Nutella? Right? Nutella? You eat Nutella? Okay. Is Nutella a really like profound taste? Like when you eat it, do you think of some great memory of your childhood? Of course not. Nutella, it's superficial, right? It's almondy, chocolatey, very sugary, fatty, goes on bread because most of the bread we eat doesn't have much flavor either. So the Nutella generation of poets and of writers, it's also in the novel you find this, mostly criticize the superficial nature of our society and the way that what we call neoliberalism, or the use of liberal ideas as an excuse for major corporations to continue making money off of us. I mean, that's essentially what they're talking about, that how that's essentially destroyed many of the traditional industries in Spain, and in fact in Western Europe in general, but we're focusing here on Spain. So writers such as Mario Cuenca Sandoval, Ana Merino, and especially Agustín Fernández Mayo, who's sort of the founder of this group, have created a sort of poetic atmosphere and a poetic universe of criticism. There's a lot of symbolism in their work that specifically speaks to how the culture that we've created in the sort of postmodern era has created what we call a post-human situation, where now our connection to the technology is almost a connection between the cybernetic and the organic, right? I'm a big Trekkie, and we always talk about the Borg. We see sort of first steps to that in the literature. And so the idea is that we should love and trust science, but we also have to be careful that we don't become subsumed into something vapid, something meaningless, right? So that's the basic goal of these writers. So as an example, I was going to read a very short poem by Fernández Mayo in Spanish, so you could hear kind of the rhythm of it, and then in English. And I should let you know, I speak Castilian Spanish. So if you're listening, say, wait, does he have a lisp in Spanish? What's going on? He sounds like he's choking. No, you say fe, feta, ge, jota. So it's a somewhat more harsh dialect. All right, so here's the poem. Desde que en 2013 se confirmó la existencia del bosón de Higgs, el vacío no es la nada, sino un lugar lleno de partículas. Queda así la nada reservada para el lenguaje de la poesía, las religiones, el ámbito de lo que algunos llaman lo difuso. La realidad, por mediación del lenguaje, como un río se ha creado a la vez que escindido. Ello me plantea un problema, radical duda que se hunde en el lodo de mi lenguaje aprendido. Buscarte en el vacío, en la nada, ¿en cuál estás tú ahora? In English, and again, this is my translation. I'm not a professional translator, so just keep that in mind. Ever since the existence of the Higgs boson was confirmed in 2013, emptiness is no longer nothing, but rather a place full of particles. Nothingness remains reserved for the language of poetry, religions, the context of what some call the veiled. Reality, through the mediation of language, like a river, has at the same time created and split itself. This presents a problem, a sweeping doubt that sinks into the sludge of my learned language. To find you in the emptiness or the nothing in which you now reside. So you can see how we take something very, a scientific fact, something groundbreaking, and then turns it into something that tries to become more profound, but in reality simply uncovers essentially a superficial problem. His own expression doesn't allow him to access a greater truth. So that's one tendency. Another tendency, it's somewhat secondary, but it feeds into the first, is that of mystical writers. So we see a resurgence of mysticism. At the same time, we see this criticism of the vapid. It's interesting because you would think that they would contrast each other, but they actually tie in really, really beautifully. So looking for a deeper meaning in a superficial world, and in the 21st century, you tend to see that combination happen. There are poets such as Clara Janés, Jesús Jiménez Reinaldo, and Izaraba Tres Cuevas, all of whom I've studied, I've written about. And then there are other poets that incorporate aspects of both, even though they're from a different generation. The point of their reading, oh, thank you, that the point of their reading was, or their reading of the world, of their writing, was not necessarily either the post-human or the mystical. And one of those writers is Anna Rossetti. She's a 1980s poet. I'm actually currently writing a book on her work and how this fits in her work. So as an example, I wanted to read a poem by Izaraba Tres Cuevas. And I'll give you just a really quick analysis of it after reading in Spanish. And I apologize again for not having a translation. So I'll try to read it slowly. So, you know, if whatever Spanish you know, I don't know how much everybody here knows, that you can follow along somewhat with the language. So it's called Soneto a Rabindranath. Que azul caminabas entre las flores, por saber tu nombre, te deshojaba, te iba observando mientras te hablaba, y en la mirada tenías colores. Tu voz dibujaba los interiores, el halo de luz se difuminaba, y entre las letras escritas jugaba a instaurar pasajes y resplandores. Todos los mundos llevaban a ti, el homenaje del tiempo a tu esencia. Inventaste un sol, residiste ahí. Prendió tu llama genial la cadencia de cada verso que un día leí. Solo tú hacías de la magia ciencia. So in a quick analysis, she's really referring to a poet, Rabindranath, who, Rabindranath Tagore, he was the first non-European winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature for his work, Gitanjali. And in the work was famed for delicate spirituality and a devotional symbolism, as well as an adherence to mystical process that we now find in many Iberian poets. So what he did, yes, Joellen, yes, that was a sonnet. Exactly. Thank you. It was a sonnet. And so there's sort of an honoring of his place in the trajectory of Persian to Arabic speaking to medieval Spanish to contemporary Spanish mystical literatures. And there are several other symbols there that are important, but I won't bore you with that because Joy Ellen also asked me to read some poems from my new book. I'll show it to you. It's an ode to friendship. Came out with Finishing Line Press this year. And again, it was 8 months behind schedule due to the pandemic, but it came out. We're happy. And essentially, so to open up a little bit about it, the book talks about a sort of crisis, an emotional crisis that I went through. And I talked about this in my talk at the Switzer Library in Marietta several weeks back, that eventually led to my divorce. So, which was actually a happy thing and with all was said and done. But to get to that point, obviously there's a certain emotional crisis that happens. And I didn't realize how many friends I had to support me until I really started to receive that support from them. I have always tried to be there for people. I've always tried to mentor colleagues. I've always tried to help friends through difficult times, and I never really expected anything from them. And so to have them there to support me to go through that process was so important. And I'm always thankful, and I always thank them both publicly and privately. Many of them actually are younger people who I met while studying in the music program. So at Kennesaw State, we have a special program where full-time faculty and staff can take up to 9 credit hours of courses, and the university pays for all but a few lab fees. So in my case, it's a music fee. The university pays for the rest of it as long as you keep about a C average or above in your courses. So my dream when I was younger was to earn my Bachelor of Music in oboe performance. And I didn't because someone important in my life at the time, who's still important in my life, talked me out of it. And I ended up, of course, I have a wonderful career in literature, and I love what I do, and I love researching, teaching, presenting to wonderful audiences like y'all. However, it was always in the back of my mind, right? So, and a few years ago, I decided I'm a full professor now. I'm tenured. My job is working out just fine. I'm able to do everything and still study. So I decided to go back and earn my degree. So I've been doing that. So that's actually where I was before this. I was in an oral skills class to be able to do sight singing and transcribing music that you hear and that sort of thing. So I also perform in the Kennesaw State Symphony Orchestra. But in the meantime, I spend time around a lot of people who are quite a bit younger than I am. And a lot of them, I wouldn't want to, some of them have told me they actually see me as a father figure. Most of them see me as just an older friend or an older classmate or an older colleague, which is, it's an honor because those relationships have informed me as a college professor as to the struggles that those students go through. They're so very different from what we all went through 20, 30, 40 years ago. Many of them financially doesn't exist for them for the most part. At least not in the same way. And many of them are working full time, taking care of family or siblings or parents, especially now the pandemic, and taking a full course load. It's a lot, and it's something many of us didn't have to go through. So many of those friendships came from that group of people, which was fascinating. So upon moving through this process, I wrote this book as a way to honor all the friends, both there and friends I have here in my home department and friends I have outside, but also to music, because music is part of what really got me through this. So I have 3 poems I'd like to read for y'all. One of them is the first poem in the book. It's called "The Awakening." The next poem I would like to read is, I assumed y'all wanted to hear one in Spanish. So I have one in Spanish to read, and unfortunately, I never translated it because I wrote it in Spanish. And then finally, a poem called "The Gap," which talks about youth and friendship in youth. So, "The Awakening." Daylight means so many different things now. Streams of dark yellow, almost invisible through branches, joining and splitting, dew of gods over pollen and soot, the D flat minor arpeggio drags against the backdrop of blue. White, thin curtains contain only the day's earth and shadow. A lighter brown, almost gray, hard light and tears caress my cheeks at the sight. Your voice a longing lost. A dune of moving sounds ease the river's flow. There's no stopping it now, no wish to fight. Streams of clear salt embedded in joy. To step out means so many different things now. So that was the first poem in the work. The second poem I'd like to read for y'all today is about actually one of the poets whom I mentioned in the first part of the talk, Izaraba Tres Cuevas, with whom I share a very deep friendship. We correspond quite often. We write similar veins as literary critics as well as in our poetry. And so this is a poem for her. I have many poems here that I dedicated to individuals. And each of those individuals approved the poem. They all read them, they loved them. They said, fine, go ahead and publish it. It was fine. The title is Sua. And Sua doesn't sound like Spanish because it isn't. It's actually Basque. So her name is actually Izarasua, right? Which means fire in the light. And so she goes by Izara, but her full name is Izarasua. So I titled it Sua as a sort of play on words, play on names. But to get to the depth of a name, to the depth of the real name. Sua. Tocaste mi brazo derecho con tu mano izquierda. Un gesto de cariño entre las bocas de prietos leones. No quiero que pienses que al mecer el mío me dejara. Acercaba de hecho mi alegre brazo hacia tu mano, que en este mundo no hay espacio para los humanos. La mano del silencio, de todo lo que no hay que decir. La mano que sujeta la hoja. Y la otra que mece contra el mundo de las multiplicaciones y su devorador ceñir. Tu brazo con mi brazo, tu mano con mi mano. Los ojos como la marcha oscura encendida por la luz. Tu ojo con mi ojo, dos antorchas en la noche oscura de avenidas, y nuestro añorado abrazo, un corazón que derriba muros. So, and the poem was about actually a walk we had together last time we saw each other 2 years ago, where in Spain, it's very common when two people are walking together, one will kind of hold the arm of the other. It's very common. And so she did that. And I mean, there was, we were just friends, nothing like that, but it's certainly a gesture of friendship and of caring. And it's something that united us in a sort of motion in real time, but an emotion in a mystical time and in a deeper time. So, well, thank you, Joy Ellen. That's very kind. Appreciate it. The final poem I was hoping to share with y'all is called The Gap. And again, it's talking about youth and friendship. It's one of the final poems of the work. The Gap. Rows of dresses and pants, some yellow or blue, and jeggings all around a sea of empty space. My daughter pulled out a lightly colored piece and asked to try it on. Of course, I acquiesced. As she closed the door in the centrally located dressing rooms, two young women loosed their ideas into the unsuspecting air. One asked if her friend was dating that guy. The friend gasped, "No, he's just a friend, a good friend." And the other said, "Of course," in a voice of a sailor who thought he saw his beloved land as the sirens moved in to greet them. This is the problem in a purer, more innocent form when you're young. That was the poem. So very different from the other two. Again, trying to give a lighter ending to the book. So that's what I was hoping to present. I'm currently working on just poems here and there. A lot of my time has been dedicated to writing my new book about Anna Rossetti, and making oboe reeds. Quite frankly, it's a lot. So, and of course, taking care of my beautiful daughter. She'll be 14 in a few weeks. So, a wonderful thing. Yeah, my daughter actually lives with me. So it's
beautiful.
It's wonderful. She's great. I actually, one of the poems here is dedicated to how the love of a child can save you from so many things.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you. So, and if anybody's got any questions, would like to hear any more poems, please, by all means.
I just wanted to make a comment.
Yes.
I think that this topic for today's Coffee with the Curator was really appropriate for me. My husband has gone back to school and he's getting his master's degree in professional writing. And he's taking, one of the classes he's taking is genre writing. And so they're on the poems right now. He just wrote, he's a screenwriter. He does films and stuff. So he just is learning about poems and how to write them. He just wrote 2 short 1-page poems, and one was like really had a serious meaning behind it, and the other one was very funny and not funny but ironic kind of. And so it reminds me of the poem, especially that last one you just read, The Gap. It just reminds me of the stuff my husband's doing right now.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And I'm glad that he's working on his writing and studying writing. there are a lot of different ways to approach poetry, and a lot of times people think poetry either has to become super direct or super indirect. So condensed language is exactly that, but it doesn't mean obscure language, and it doesn't mean overly narrative language. And so it's finding that balance is really important. It's really difficult. So I'm le felicito, we say in Spanish, I salute him. I wish him the best in that. That's wonderful. And that's wonderful that he has you there to support him, because one of the more difficult things is when you either don't have the support or you have someone present who isn't as supportive. It can be difficult, and to have somebody who's supporting him, that's just wonderful. So thank you for the comment.
Um, Oh, yeah,
Yes. Yes.
talking about over descriptive and things, it can get that way.
Mhm.
He started out when he wrote them very over descriptive because he thought that, it was like super formal almost because
Mhm.
he doesn't write poetry. And so as he was reading through it, he was like, this is just like reading a thesaurus. I've used too many synonyms. Let's just dial it back some. So I think that was, yeah, that's cool.
Okay. Yeah. And it's a learning process. I mean, the first poems I ever wrote, Jose Marti has a poem about this from, he's talking about the first poems he wrote in his late teens, where he put his entire souls, Jose Marti, right, from the Caribbean, he put his entire soul into this poem and lashed out with everything he had and sent it in for publication, and they sent it back with a no thank you. And at the time, he was mortally insulted. Then he realized, he looked back 10 years later, said, no, that poem was horrible. Because it had so much emotion, but didn't go anywhere. It didn't say anything. It just said something to him at the time, but it wasn't communicative. And that level of communicability is something that you really need in a poem. So yeah, so thank you, Maggie, for sharing that. Before going to any other questions, I was hoping to comment on some of these statements in the comments in the chat.
Absolutely.
So to Maureen, yes, oboe reads are difficult. I usually spend about a half hour to 45 minutes on each read, just getting it to where I can make it crow or make a sound out of it and play a scale on it that doesn't sound like a duck getting stepped on while on fire. Then I have to leave it alone for a day or two, go back for another half hour to 45 minutes and hope it works, because a lot of times you'll be working on a read and after an hour and a half, it just won't play. And you just have to put it in your thumb and go snap. And that's it, and just start over. I have several I'm working on at the moment, and some are easy than others. Every read is different, just like every person's different. But the reads, they're difficult too, because you could have one that plays beautifully, and an hour later it sounds terrible. It just decided to be terrible. But thank you for the comment. I appreciate it. Lori, this was wonderful. Thank you so much, Lori. I really appreciate it. It's very heartwarming when I feel like my poetry has a positive impact on someone. And so thank you so much. That means a lot. So thank you. Barbara, can you expand on emotion and motion in the second poem as it relates to Mrs. Oh, okay. Yes. So yes. So what sets Iberian poets apart is the history behind Iberian poetry. So unlike most of Western European cultures and most of Western Europe, the effect of 800 years of Arabic speaking, not Latin speaking, Islamic culture in the peninsula, that 8 centuries had a profound effect on the outlooks and the expressions that you find, the modes of expression you find in the Iberian Peninsula. Let's look, for example, at cuisine from France and cuisine from Spain. We think of France, what do we think, right? Heavy, creamy, maybe not bland, but certainly not popping, right? We think of Spanish cuisine. What do we think? Tomato, onion, garlic, salsa. Even though they don't actually salsa in Spain, it's still, we think of something where it makes us want to get up and dance, right? Like that's what we think of. And in most Hispanic cultures, to some degree or another, that cuisine went to the Americas, right? So of course, native cuisines, they're still the basis of all the culinary sort of contexts and environments, but there's a heavy influence of Spanish cuisine. And Spanish cuisine uses a lot of very strong flavors combined together. So when you look at just the food, you see that difference, right? In the mystical poetry, mystics like Eckhart and mystical tendencies you find in writers like I'm actually thinking now of opera, because you actually find some of this in Wagner. in other Western European tendencies, you find something that's based on Platonic thought. You find something based on very heavily based on Catholicism, talking about the three stages of self-flagellation, self-recognition, and illumination. The influence that I tend to find in my research on, and others have found, I mean, I'm not the first one to do this, in Iberian poetries, is that of the Sufi order, or many of the different Sufi orders. And Sufism is a mysticism tied to Islam, not tied to Christianity. It wasn't born of Islam, but it's tied to it. It actually predates Islam. But the connection is so deep now that they kind of go one and the same, just like Christian mysticism along with Christianity. They didn't exactly start at the same time, but they're tied together so uniquely and so deeply, you can't really tease them apart. Or the Kabbalah with Judaism. Kabbalah predates most Jewish texts because the alphabet predates the text, right? And the alphabet is the basis. The alphabet and the numerical system based on the Hebrew alphabet as it forms the basis of the Kabbalah. But they're so tied together now, you can't really tease them apart. So that was the major influence on the 16th century Catholic writers in Spain, not French mystical thought or English mystical thought, but what now we call Syrian or Iranian or Persian mystical thought. And that was actually rooted in the mystical thought of Muslims in what's now Pakistan and northern India. Because I don't know if y'all remember, prior to the partition, Pakistan and India were a single sort of fluid mass. You had Muslims and you had Hindus living in the same region, right? To very simplify, very, very simply. As I tease out, we lost that, but they were there, so there's a lot of intermingling. And there was this, I want to say 12th century mystic called Suhardi, who created a lot of these sort of processes. Like he enumerated steps that Sufi need to take for mystical illumination. That moved on through Syria, which at the time was Damascus was one of the largest and most influential cultural cities in the Muslim world. That went to the Muslim school, the Islamic school in Murcia in southern Spain, which at the time was Murcia. It was a Muslim city, and that philosophy tended to influence much more heavily Saint Teresa and Saint John. And so when you read their text, you aren't really reading you're reading a Christianized Sufi symbolism in a mystical process that is essentially Sufi. So jump 4 centuries later, you start to see these writers come back as a contestation to the idea that somehow there's no meaning in our lives. I mean, what they do. And that's what came out in the 1960s and 70s in postmodernity and postmodernism. The idea that somehow we're in a plane circling an airport, but the airport doesn't actually exist. And what they say is, well, it isn't that it doesn't exist, and it isn't that it does exist, that we've got to build it. So let's build it through this process, and that will give us this level of illumination we wouldn't have before. But they based it on the process they got from St. John, St. Teresa, and that was Sufi, not Christian. We can interpret St. Teresa also as Christian because there are certain elements there that are very strongly attached to Christian mysticism. It's a lot deeper than that. It's more nuanced than that. And when you look at the nuances, you start to see something outside of that. Now, the emotion versus motion. Different emotions serve as symbols in Sufi mysticism for different steps in the mystical process, right? So the emotion of love, for example, is the tying of the two to one in the symbolic house. That is the place where then the divine also enters, and the two who are seeker and guide united can now touch physically, right? Because there's nothing physical about this, but touch in a spiritual way, the divine directly, rather than simply having to say pray to the divine and hope for a response. And so the poem I tried in my poem, I don't know how successfully, depends on the reader, I guess, to take the idea of motion of walking as one step to the next step, and the two walking as one, the seeker and the guide. In this case, I would be the seeker, she would be the guide, okay? And that walking together puts us in a place closer to true knowledge. Because we can take divine illumination, not necessarily, we don't have to take it as religious, as a religious symbol of connection with God. We can take it as, or gods, or whatever practices you have. We can take it as connection more directly with the truth, whatever that truth may lead us. Okay. And that ties back into what we talked about with Fernandez Mayo and his idea of the Higgs boson particle, where there is no nothing. There's always something there, even if we don't see it or sense it. So the idea now is to find a way to express that, and we're completely unable to do so because we don't have the means, because language is so limited, it doesn't give us the means. So what do? Well, we can look at some of these mystical processes as ways to use language to go beyond language and connect with others, thereby connecting with the truth. Does that all make sense? Does that? Okay. Yeah.
This is incredible. It's, things I just hadn't really connected or thought about before. And I think for me, this whole idea of, I've of course heard of, mysticism and religious senses, but in literature and in poetry, it's I don't know, this is all new for me, and it's amazing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. The idea of the mystical. Well, because also people talk about mysticism. I see this in literary criticism. I mean, these are colleagues of mine who talk about, oh, this poem is mystical, and then they just go to the next one. They don't define it. They don't analyze it. This is mystical. I say, well, I remember looking at this back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, thinking, well, what does mystical mean? Like, if we're going to use a term in criticism, as a scientifically approved paper, what does that word mean? And so I realized there's a simple definition. It's contact with the divine. However, again, this goes to, we live in a world where we need to accept not everybody believes in the same thing. One of my best friends is atheist. Another one is agnostic. I'm Jewish. Another one is Muslim. Another one is Christian. They're, Baptist, Methodist, whatever, Catholic. We all have different ways of approaching this topic. So the interpretation of the symbols is the part that's important individually, and that each of us can inform our own experience as to what we're seeking and how we're going to seek it. But according to the Sufi process, you need a guide who's usually somebody who's already done this. You need a guide, and you need to become one in the process. Okay? So that's really the crux of that concept. So, yes.
Can I just ask then? So are the poets that are writing about mysticism attempting to define divine in different ways still? Or have they accepted a common definition of divine?
No, and that's one of the interesting things about these poets is only a couple of them actually got together to talk about it. For the most part, they're just doing their own thing. The fascinating part is how they do it similarly, and they're using the same symbols to try to do the same thing in the poetry. However, for one of them, it's seeking the truth about love. For another, it's seeking divine connection. For another, it's seeking the truth of deeper meaning in a vapid world. For another, it's the rebellion against those who would try to sap your depth for their own superficial reasons. So they're all doing it for different reasons, but the symbolism they use keeps coming back to the same place. And again, many of them haven't spoken with each other about it. That's the fascinating part for me. And so when I speak with each of them individually, and I say to them, you in Lisbon, in Joaquim Pessoa, and Clara Janes, and Jesus Jimenez Reinaldo, who's a school teacher in northern Spain, you're all saying the same thing, and they just don't talk with each other, but they're all doing so. When we talk about something in the air, it feels like, and for the last 20 years I've been studying this, there's something in the air. There's something that goes beyond just criticizing a world that's lost deeper meaning, and that there are people searching for that. They're just all doing it independently. And I kind of wonder what would happen if we ever actually got them together in a room and got them talking. Unfortunately, I know one of them is very infirm and doesn't travel. Another one, and because of the pandemic, it's hard to get them all together. And many of them don't speak the same languages. One of them doesn't speak Portuguese or English. The other one doesn't speak Spanish or English. And so there's some difficulties in that. But it's the spirit of it that brings their work together, even though they themselves remain separated. Did I answer your question? Yeah,
That's
okay.
wonderful. I know
Well, thank you,
Maggie,
Barbara.
do you have a comment?
Yeah, I feel like today's program was made especially for me and spoke just to me. One of my minors in my undergraduate was religious studies,
Okay.
and my other minor was painting. And so I combined those two, and mysticism in religious studies was just this fascinating. We learned about, I mean, broad range of everything, and it stuck with me. And so I combined it with my painting, and I focused on Catholic iconography. I'm not Catholic. I just fell in love with the symbolism. And so everything you're saying, I feel I feel like you're talking to me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Maureen, you also said that you've also commented that you feel the same way. Well, I'm so glad that a talk like this can have that kind of impact on you. Really, it means a whole lot to me. So thank you so much. It's this is you never know if the work you do can have an impact on others. So it's very heartwarming to know that's how y'all feel. So thank you so much. And I mean, I'm always open to conversation. I would love to see some of your paintings. I would love to talk with you all more about some of these topics. Because there's so much there. And this is really just talking about Spain. If we looked at mystical writers in Mexico, who are many, many fewer, we're looking at people who are both living in that sort of the narco state situation, but they're also trying to find something deeper. But then really you have to go back several decades to find those who are looking at Greco-Roman beliefs as part of their own process of finding a greater truth. And it's fascinating to see, because you then start to see these patterns of epochs where people are really looking for that. They're searching for it. And it goes beyond politics and beyond language, and it goes into really the heart of the human condition in certain periods. So thank you, Maggie. Thank you, and thank you, Maureen, and really appreciate it.
Can you talk a little bit about your inspirations when you write, and also how you write, when you write, that type of thing?
Sure. Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I'd love to. So a lot of times my inspiration is the world, just the world around me in a very general sense. So I like to go out running, and many times I'll see, say, a flower, and something about the flower, the context, the scent, the condition, something around it will inspire me to write maybe a couple verses. And then a month or two or a year or two later, I'll come back and look at those and remember and look at how my life has changed since that moment, and write and use that as a catalyst to write about. Sometimes it's something my daughter does. Sometimes it's, particularly with this book, it was, the process of ending a marriage. And the music, and also music is a huge. I actually have an entire book I published a few years ago titled "The Musician," where it's about the impact that music had on me, and how I play several instruments, not just oboe. I play saxophone, I play clarinet, and how each of those has, because of different tones, timbres, and the different uses for me of each of those instruments, the instrument feels applied to different parts of my life. And so I try to find inspiration in pretty much everything. I do. If I don't have a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen around me, I have my phone on me. And if something inspires me at the moment, I stop. Unless I'm driving, then I pull over. Then I stop and take out my phone and note a verse or two, or note a symbol, or note a word, and make a mental note. Okay, I'm going to come back to that someday. And then I just keep going on my merry way. Sometimes that day I come back to it. Sometimes it's a year or two, but I always come back. My writing process is very much what I teach my students in the critical reading and applied writing course. Or wait, yeah, critical reading, applied writing. I thought I'd switch it for a second, which is essentially the only methods course we have in the foreign language programs, where I talk about, first I get my idea, my inspiration. Then I write an idea of how I'd like to approach it and what examples I would like to use or example I'd like to use to illustrate this. And this could be prose or poetry, but it works for poetry as well. I'll then start expanding out on that idea. And I'll take each element of the first idea and kind of expand out on each of those. Then I leave it alone. Just don't even look at it for at least 2 days, but usually much more. I think the poem that I wrote recently, I'm still leaving it alone. I'm going to leave it alone for another week before I get back to it. Okay. Then I get back to it and I do an assessment of content, organization, functional grammar, basic grammar. So content, is it saying what I want to say? Organization, is it saying it the way I want to say it? Okay. Functional grammar are connectors and the flow of the text. Am I connecting phrases properly? Am I creating something joined or disjointed? Am I doing it purposefully or accidentally? If I were not me, if I were just anybody looking at this, would I understand what it's trying to say at some level? Okay. Then I look at basic grammar. Is this English? Is this Spanish? Is this Portuguese? Or did I just make up a word? Because we all know that happens, native language or not native. We've all that, and because I have 3 languages or 4 languages going around my head all the time, I'll just throw in a word that, I'll be writing like in English and I'll suddenly say blah, 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 blah. And he realized, no, I'll say, and he gave the account of his dream. Se dio cuenta. He realized he made his dream. Well, that doesn't function. That doesn't really function. It doesn't work in English. So I'll have to go back and, oh, no. Okay, I got to rewrite this. But if it messes up the rhythm or the rhyme or the structure, then I've got to go back to the top and start over again. And then I leave it alone. And then I go back and I go through the whole process over again. And I always make changes. I do that 3 or 4 times. If I can get a beta reader, I'll do that. I did that for this book and got some really good feedback. If I can't, I just go with it and hope for the best. But that's generally what I do. For prose, I'll do just content organization first, make changes, then functional grammar, make changes, then basic grammar, make changes, then go through the whole thing again and again and again and again until, as Billy Collins said, I'm not ready to finish, I'm ready to abandon it. Because he's the one who actually said, you never finish a text, you simply abandon it. So, and I use that philosophy in my day-to-day.
I understand that so much. And I wanted to comment on one point you said about how, you've got, especially with, you speaking so many languages and having all that swirling around in your head. So I was thinking about how generous it was of you to, when you read that first poem, to translate it for us, but then saying that, like, for example, with the poem, one of the poems you wrote that was in Spanish, you're like, well, I didn't translate, I wrote it in Spanish.
Yeah.
I can imagine that act of translating a poem can be almost painful because it doesn't, I don't know how can you really express it the same way in another language?
No, you can't. And I'm no pro. Again, I've done some translation work. I've translated poetry. Honestly, I don't like it, and it's because you end up losing a lot.
Yeah.
You lose a lot in the translation. That poem in particular, if I tried to translate it, I know at least 2 verses that I'm not sure what I would do with them because I wasn't thinking in English when I wrote it.
Right.
I was thinking in Spanish, and with work in Portuguese as well, there are a lot of phrases that when you try to write them, or the worst part are the plays on words. So in poetry, you find a lot of plays on words, a lot of idiomatic expressions. When you translate it, not only do you lose something in translation, but you're going to change the rhythm and the rhyme of the text. And even in free verse, right, you've still got an internal rhythm and you've still got usually internal rhyme schemes that you're playing with. You lose all of that. So once you've lost that, how do you recover it without messing up the language you're translating into? It's one of the reasons too that, so my native language is English. We always try to translate into our native language, not into the non-native language. No matter how skilled we are, we will never do justice to the non-native language, right? Because you're really trying to honor both. And it's hard to do when you're trying to translate into a language that you weren't born into, that you didn't live, eat, sleep, and breathe since you were, yay big. And so, yeah, I don't like translating, but really it also means that many of my own poetry, I will translate it if I have to, and I have other books where I've done so, but I always give the caveat that what you're hearing in English is not what I wrote.
Absolutely.
It's it's how I translated the meaning and the words as well as possible, but it's never 100%. So does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yes.
Good. And I hope I'm answering everybody's questions in a satisfactory way. I would hate to leave y'all with the feeling that I didn't answer something. So.
Oh no, this has been great. And in the chat, I had just said that I was just thinking about pulling away from the poems. I feel like, isn't that hard? Because you just want it to, I don't know, like it.
Yeah.
I guess it has to be really intentional to do that.
Well, going back to Maureen's comment about the oboe reeds being difficult, it's also, poems are also difficult, but you have to pull away for the same reason.
Yeah.
And it's because, just like with oboe, if I'm playing for 2 hours straight, my jaws, my lips are getting tired. You're sitting here like this for 2 hours, you're going to get tired, right? Blowing through two basically blades of grass that don't want to blow into a horn that doesn't want to do anything. You're, maybe it's angry at you or had a bad day or whatever. You're going to get tired. With a poem, I'll sit there for an hour or two. After, my mind just goes numb because I've just gone through it too much. I have to step away. Those of us who are parents of teenagers, at some point you just got to step away. You just gotta, okay, you are not a logical being. I have to go over here for 5 minutes or maybe a few hours.
And parents of toddlers.
And parents of parents of toddlers. When you have children, you realize why certain species eat their young. I mean, it's just it's hard. It's hard, but it's worth it. It's wonderful. And my daughter, I'm so happy that I was able to put that effort in when she was so much younger. Despite, I was working 60, 70 hours a week, trying to do other things. I'm so glad I put that effort in when she was younger. She and I have a beautiful rapport now. And again, she's with me 6 days a week. So we have a wonderful rapport. And because we didn't, it would be horrible. And so because of those roots that we planted, and just like a text, just like music, or just like anything we do, it's those roots that we plant that are so very solid that allow the tree to grow, right? So yeah. So
That's incredible.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
In French, the French language does not want to accept slang. They're particular about what's admitted to the French language.
Right.
Do you use slang readily? Do you have any emotions along the lines of the French philosophy, or do you differ there?
That's a wonderful question, actually. So in formal parlance, of course, I don't use a lot of slang. I would only use it to break the tension. So let's say we're talking about something really heady and really depressing, but it's very cerebral topic. I'll at some point stop and say, you know what, guys, this really sucks. I'm sorry. And then I'll go on with the talk. It breaks the tension and it lets my mind rest as well, because staying up there for so long, it's even for those of us who are used to it, it can be tiring, just like poetry, just like the music, everything else. I spend a lot of time around, younger students because of the music program. So I've gotten more comfortable with using slang in my day-to-day, because again, if I'm going to communicate with my classmates, I have to do so. I'm around my students who are also that same age group. So if I don't feel comfortable with particularly contemporary slang, I'm going to have a hard time communicating with them when I need to get to them beyond the textual content or the textual expression, right? Beyond the text, when I need to get through to them, I need to be able to do it in a way that isn't so heady, isn't so 45-year-old college professor talking with a 20-year-old student who's thinking about how many burgers they're going to have to flip today for the next 6 hours after class, and then go home, take care of their younger brother or sister. So it's a way of keeping connected with the world. So I've had to become more comfortable with it. When I was, honestly, I feel like I'm more comfortable with it now than when I was younger. When I was younger, I was trying to prove that I was capable of keeping this discourse up. And so I didn't use slang as much. Now it's a little more. I've also relaxed more in my middle age. I've relaxed much more about my self-expression. I've relaxed much more about my comfort level with other people. And that's allowed me to feel more fluid in all registers of language, in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
That was wonderful and makes so much sense, Robert, I cannot say thank you enough. Thank you so much for this wonderful, for the readings, for your talk, and this incredible discussion that we've had. I think we all feel touched. It's going to be hard to go to the regular workday. We're like, you know, when your spirit moves a bit. So thank you so much. I just truly appreciate it. And I wanted to say to all of you, thank you for just this wonderful engagement and the questions. And I think we really got a treat today. So this was great. Just as a reminder, again, we're not going to meet online next week because we're going to be in person for our Rare Book Open House program. I'll send an email, but we will meet online the following week. So anyway, can we just, whether you're unmuted or muted, can we give Dr. Robert Simon a round of applause?
Yay.
Yay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Marvelous. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day and gets to just ponder on these things that we've discussed this morning. So take care, y'all, and I will see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you to
Great,
all y'all
Curator.
for being here. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.